Why is it wrong to receive communion while kneeling? So that is a question that seems to come up a lot. It has for the several decades I've been alive and paying attention to, let's just say, internal politics of the church and preferences, and one side or whatever. Um, this seems to come up every so often, and it's kind of getting old because like we have the internet, and so this is very easy to fact check. And so that's what we're going to do today is we're going to review timeless information that the church has online that we can all read and verify exactly what the answer is when it comes to why is it wrong to receive communion kneeling. Before I go on, though, I do want to say I apologize for not coming on Friday and not leaving a note. That was my bad. I was sick and my family was sick and just a lot of things going on at the house. And so that was totally my bad. Second, if you're interested in still joining the Fraternal Papist fraternity for Exodus 90, send me an email at modernpapist@gmail.com. So yes, it was very bad. It was very bad. All right. So let's take a look at, oh man, what it says. So I am looking at specifically the reception of Holy Communion at Mass by the USCCB, the governing body of the United States. So just this is a very clear thing. This is like, you can see it up here in the corner. The USCCB, okay, the reception of Holy Communion at Mass. And this is what it says. The general instruction asks each country's conference of bishops to determine the posture to be used for the reception of communion and the act of reverence to be made by each person as he or she receives communion. In the United States, the body of bishops has determined that the norm is that Holy Communion is to be received standing unless an individual member of the faithful wishes to receive communion while kneeling, and that a bow is the act of reverence made by those receiving. This norm is supported by an instruction by the Holy See regarding the Eucharist and distributing Holy Communion. It is to be remembered that the sacred ministers may not deny the sacraments to those who seek them in a reasonable manner, are rightly disposed, and are not prohibited by law from receiving them. Hence, any baptized Catholic who is not prevented by law must be admitted to Holy Communion. Therefore, it is not licit to deny Holy Communion to any of Christ's faithful solely on the grounds, for example, that the person wishes to receive the Eucharist kneeling or standing. This is Redemptionis Sacramentum. I am so bad with Latin. I'm sorry. So, the norm of the church is in the United States is to stand while receiving communion. But you're able to kneel if you want to. So you kind of come back to the same question though, right? Why is it wrong to receive communion kneeling? Because the understanding that gets put forth every so often is that it's wrong. That you shouldn't be doing it. There's an overemphasis on the norm and not an emphasis on, hey, you have a right to receive communion while kneeling, which you do, like according to the church. So those are the documents. That's the citations. So like, I'm a science person. I'm all about citations. If you can show where things line up and where people, where the bricks fall, so to speak, you got my vote. Okay. So like, when it comes to this, like, this is something where it's pretty straightforward. The church says you're able to receive while kneeling, and you can't be barred if you're just receiving while kneeling. So now what's the next thing that comes up? Well, usually if you're in a discussion, which I've been on this, and I'm sure many of you have been too. Um, well, why are you doing it to show off? Like you'll sometimes get that question, right? Like it's a very pointed, biased, uncharitable question. And so, what you may have to do in a pretty like dramatic way with your phone is go to something like this. And I have Catholic Answers open, um, but it's about judgment. Okay. Respect. So I'm going to read you what the Catechism says between like their summary of the Catechism between 2477 to 2478. Respect for the reputation of persons forbids every attitude and word likely to cause them unjust injury. He becomes guilty of rash judgment, who even tacitly assumes are true without sufficient foundation the moral fault of a neighbor. Why are you doing it to show off? Why are you acting like you're better than everybody else? Why are you doing this to get noticed? Okay, that's an example. And it doesn't matter who says it. Like you're suggesting something where you're judging the heart of the individual on why they're doing a pious action without sufficient evidence of knowing why they're doing it. They haven't told you. All you do is you see them kneel and receiving. Hey Hayes, nice to see you. And so what's the next one? Of detraction, who without objectively valid reason discloses another's faults and failings to persons who did not know them. Of calumny, by remarks contrary to the truth, harms the reputation of others and gives occasion for false judgments concerning them. So, so this is kind of like a combination of the first and last one in regards to what typically happens with this conversation. So, to avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret insofar as possible his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another's statement than to condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it. And if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to a correct interpretation so that he may be saved. So this is like a, it's about loving the person, right? Like you're supposed to love, who you're correcting, who you're talking to. But when someone says, you're, why are you, again, doing it to show off? Why are you doing it to stand out? Why are you doing it for a reason that you didn't tell them and that they're just kind of saying, because they don't have a charitable understanding of what you're doing, or they're saying something that is not okay. It creates a real problem. And so this isn't just something of a recent thing. Like typically people will come to videos like this because something recent happened. It literally doesn't matter what the event did. It doesn't matter what station the person who made this claim was. You're not supposed to make a judgment on the people's hearts and thoughts when they're doing an action. So, it is a choice. I did go into, so yeah, it's explained here that you do have a choice to do it. In America, occasionally it'll bubble to the surface where someone says, "Hey, the norm is standing. You really should stand." And then will sometimes go above and beyond in their justifications and in rash judgment or calumny to say something that is untrue about those that receive while kneeling. And I take this kind of personally because I do receive kneeling, and I receive kneeling for a very profound reason that came to me at a very profound moment. It is not something I take lightly, and I have for a very long time known about these rules that we have in the church, insofar as what the church does out of love. Okay, so I don't want to give the idea that um what do you mean? I don't understand a Ned. What do you mean a Ned Flanders type? Okay, okay. Oh, yeah, got it. Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah, a Ned, but like it's not even like a Ned Flanders. I mean, maybe does Ned Flanders give undue burdens? Because that's typically how the argument ends up going, is that someone will give an undue burden that is not justified. So, um, I don't. I just know that that's usually just some like religious guy mouthing, saying something to people, but I don't really know behind besides that. Um, so yeah, so like that's really important. And so like once you've kind of hammered that out, so why is it wrong to receive communion while kneeling? Well, at the very beginning of the video, we discussed no, actually, it's completely justified to receive while kneeling, as the church states, even though it's the norm of the United States. We just showed here when it came to the follow-up question of why do you think you're better than other people? Why are you showing off? Why do you want attention? When you're kneeling or the accusation is done about those who kneel, um, that comes into play with judgment, where you are now judging the interior disposition of an individual that you can't possibly know unless they've told you. So now what happens? Typically what will happen is the person that you're discussing this with will say in response, well, it just takes so much time when you kneel, and like it screws up the flow, and everybody takes longer because you kneel. And you're like, okay. So when you're focused on receiving God, your biggest issue is the fact that you have to wait an extra few seconds because the person in front of you kneeled, or at most you have to wait a few minutes. That is your big issue. And so we've now taken it from it's the norm, you should do this, maybe, charitably understanding they're coming from a point of they don't want you to sin. Okay, you've shown that you're not sinning. Okay, you showed that like you're not doing it for unjust reasons, and it's the person making the assumption that you are doing it for unjust reasons is the one that's failing at understanding like what he or she should not be doing. And then now you've shown in the third case why, like, the convenience of being there for a few more minutes is just not really up to the point of being like, yeah, you definitely have to like not do what you find to be an incredibly pious devotional action right before Christ comes into your being. Like that's the argument. And like, yeah. And again, I do take this somewhat personally because that's just not, I've never known anyone who just kneels to kneel and show off. Like I've never met that person. If I have, he's very convincing. Okay. Like I've just never met that person. So I've also got a video. Well, actually, I don't have a video, but the Joy of the Faith, Ray, which we've had some videos together, as you can see at the bottom. He has a great video where he shows people receiving on the tongue and people receiving at a rail and people receiving in the line. And he looks at 5 different priests, and it's a really good little experiment. And he asks which one is faster, the communion line or altar rail. And I think that's an incredibly, I mean, being a scientist myself, like that's a really good video to watch. And so, please go and, support him. But like, he provides good, like that's a really good piece of information for this, because it shows pretty definitively that not really, like the time issue is just not that big of a deal. So you've now addressed all of those issues, right? You've now addressed the norms, You've addressed, and that you're still able to freely do that. You've addressed the accusation that you have bad interior disposition and how it's actually on that person that's doing the wrong thing. Simply asking people why they receive while kneeling is probably the best way to go, because you get to literally just hear what they say. Like you're going to hear it from the person who believes. And then the third one is, receiving in communion in the while standing is faster, which is just not true. And you could see that here in the video. He does a really good job. It's called altar rail or communion line, which is faster. So now the last part I want to get into is the documentation approval of communion in the hand under Pope Paul VI. Why am I talking about in the hand? Well, because it's related to reception while standing, while this issue is coming up. And so in the indult, let's see, the Sacred Congregation for the Discipline of the Sacraments, the instruction Ementiae Caritatis on facilitating reception of communion in certain circumstances. So there's a few things that I want to go over. And it's really like here, because he stipulates a lot of things that should happen and shouldn't happen. So Pope Paul VI, Saint Pope Paul VI. So here's kind of the one that really hits the nail, though. The new manner of giving communion must not be imposed in a way that would exclude the traditional practice. It is a matter of particular seriousness that in places where the new practice is lawfully permitted, that is, standing and receiving on the hand, every one of the faithful have the option of receiving communion on the tongue, and even when other persons are receiving communion in the hand. The two ways of receiving communion can be without question take place during the same liturgical service, which is to say they can happen at the same time. There is a twofold purpose here, that none will find it a new rite, anything disturbing to personal devotion towards the Eucharist, that the sacrament, the source and cause of unity by its very nature, will not become an occasion of discord between members of the faithful. So that one in particular is talking about communion in the hand and on the tongue. And the reason why that's important is because it has become a problem between the faithful. The indult that allows reception on the hand is kind of blending with other things, and you can kind of see that those that are okay with reception in the hand tend to also be okay with reception while standing, which also tends to be okay with reception by, or the use of, in a normal sense, the extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. So it's like it kind of branches out, right? Like there's this kind of branching out. But there's all this correlation that comes with that. But lines have kind of been drawn in that section, and it's kind of important. And the reason why it's important is because it deals with this issue itself, standing. Let me see. I need to find it really quickly because I don't want to read the whole thing. So I didn't want to make this a super long video. So although I will bring this up, whatever procedures adopted, care must be taken not to allow particles of the Eucharistic bread to fall or to be scattered. Care must also be taken that the communicants have clean hands and that their comportment is becoming and in keeping with the practice of the different people. And then, okay, I'm just going to do the quick. Okay. All right. So apparently, okay. So whoops. I guess I missed the wrong document, but or I seem to have missed the wrong or cited the wrong document here. That being said, let's see. I'll just come back to my face. All right. Sorry. So what? So it wasn't completely a waste. I'm sorry for that. But the standing as a norm. So what I'm trying to get at is standing as a norm seems to have happened from 1969 in relation to receiving on the hand in the United States. That's really important because there's a lot of what is it? There seems to be the suggestion from Vatican II in terms of practice that what we're trying to achieve is an organic sense of community focused and centered around Christ and the Eucharist, right? Like so like that's a really good understanding of like to point to. Like it's not inherently bad, like it's really good, right? Um and like historically that had a lot of application in the principle of subsidiarity as the faith expanded. And we see this in a variety of ways. An example would be like the Eastern rites, right? Like they have their own way of practicing. They stand during parts that sometimes we kneel. And so there are certain organic appreciations of that. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's obviously related to the 1969 decision. I don't know who made the decision. I couldn't find that, but what I was able to find was there a lot of articles that pointed to after 1969 was when 1969 and after was when standing became the norm in the United States. And I'm like, okay, so like how did all the churches that were kneeling and receiving on the tongue, like how did it organically turn into everyone standing in line? Like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like this seems like a very top-down application, which I'm not against top-down top-down applications when it's completely justified, right? But let's see here. So yeah, so when it's completely justified. I'm going to take a second and I'm going to read the chat because I don't want to start a new thought without reading the chat. So it's almost like we need a standard for receiving Eucharist so we don't have mistakes and so we actually treat the Eucharist like what we think it is. What you thought. Right. And so like because like in my video that I show like reception on the hand like 100 times and reception on the tongue 100 times, like you can see which one drops significantly more particles. Like it's the one on the hand. And like a lot of people don't have altar boys with the little dish to catch, right? Like that's supposed to be there like that. And that's just not a common practice. That's there for when people receive on the tongue, which I find like really odd because comparing the two, like the one that absolutely like should have that is when you receive on the hand. The problem is that people will do this. They'll take it. They'll take it, they'll grab it, and they may or may not consume it at that moment. And then not to mention if someone's like really tall and they're like really far away, like there's no way that altar boy is going to be there in time. Right. So there's a lot of practical issues with that. That I don't think people like there's an appreciation for. It's just kind of like, oh, it's allowed, it's going to happen, right? Like that's kind of what the attitude looks like. Right. I think the important distinction is that standing and in the hand were both papal indults that are meant to be permissions, not the standards. The norm is to the knee and receive on the tongue. Right. So like that's what I make an argument for with when people like will we'll have this argument that I've said during the video that when it comes to reception on the hand, like that's only when an organic this is the weird thing when an organic, because when you read the indult it says like if there's a norm of reception on the hand, and 2/3 of the bishops voted for it. I don't know how there was a reception on the hand norm in America, like at all. Like we clearly had altar rails, And then it's almost like they're trying to like get rid of the evidence by getting rid of those altar rails. Like it's like really weird. I don't think that was necessarily the case for all of them, but this idea of pushing back like their tradition is because they had obviously the new rubrics, or like how they understood it to be new. You know, that clearly happened. Like history clearly showed that to be the case. Yeah, like it's exactly like that. It's almost like we had that standard for centuries. And so yeah, here's the crazy thing. There's a church in the Kalamazoo diocese that was built. I'm not going to say which one. Just go there if you're interested, and try and I guess like try and find out. But in the Kalamazoo diocese, there's one where the building was specifically built to not be able to kneel. Like the pews were too close. You can't, and too angled. You can't actually kneel in. That should not have happened. Like, because you can't do the kneeling parts of the mass. Like you just can't. And so like I don't understand why they did that. Obviously outside of, oh, we don't care, we're just going to do what we want. Because there was a time when I went to the student parish in Kalamazoo, and everybody stood during the Eucharistic prayer. Like you're not supposed to do that. The germ says not to do that. So, but last I heard, they got a new priest in there, and they don't do that. So that's good. Yeah. So so let's see. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm not saying blah blah blah. I'm just, there's a lot to read because you guys are very prolific in your comments, and I really like that. Yes. So if there is a norm, implies the norm must already exist, and that's exactly how I read it too. That's exactly how I read it. Not be pushed on by activist bishops who want to destroy reverence for God. Okay, so that I do not know how true that is, and so I'm not going to, given especially what I just said, in terms of the let's see, the rash judgment. Like I don't know who was trying to destroy the church or destroy the reverence for God. I definitely think the action destroys the reverence for God, but I can't say that. And so obviously I'm not going to establish something as something that shouldn't be done to us that receive kneeling and then go around and turn it on the bishops. Like that's just, I'm not going to do that. So just as a clarification, and a lot of caveats, because like that's, and I know like, you know, writing, it's easy to write things, and so I understand that, but yeah, no, yeah. So like there's a lot of irreverent poses that we have, like, so the communion line is not enforced. Like the communion line, like you'll hear the point, like, well, we should be singing as we're all going up. I have very rarely ever heard a priest come out and said, hey, as you're coming out, sing the communion hymn. Like I just haven't heard that. I've seen some people do that. I myself growing up did that on occasion when nobody else was, you know, they were all afraid to sing, or, you know, they didn't feel like it was appropriate to sing. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why people don't do that. They weren't all afraid, but like they were, you know what I mean? Like there's a bunch of reasons not to sing, given the sensibilities that we have now. But it's definitely not something that's pushed. And so to suggest that it is kind of weird. All right, so let's no, I mean, like, I feel like that at St. Joseph's whenever I go there. Like, I cannot kneel completely. I actually have to like take my knees. Let's see, what is it? and do this, like take my legs and like actually sprawl them out, um, or else like I end up hitting the people behind me. Uh, let's see. Oh my gosh. Okay, I have an opinion on this, but I'm not gonna just do it off the hip. So, um, hey, if you want to make that a video, like in the sense of like there are I don't know, like there's a whole bunch of resources about like just look up like altar rails and I'm sorry, not altar rails, but altars in the middle and on the side, and like there's a whole bunch about it. So I'm not gonna give my opinion. You can probably tell what my opinion is, but I'm not gonna give it outright. So just that's a very interesting point though, Hayes. Um so I don't think we're supposed to, but we are. Like I like that's the thing is like you're singing to going to receive God. Like it's like they're trying to like the intent is to like you're not just silent waiting there to do it. You're going up and you're singing like as a choir, you know, and you're doing what the angels are doing, you know. You know, there's a whole bunch of things just, you know, off the top of my head that, like make sense in that capacity. The problem is you can still kneel while you do that. Like it's like, you know, when you see old churches like in Europe, like they still just have two lines. And then you have the altar rail. And they still have to just wait there. Like they still have to like so I don't know why like singing is unique to standing. I just find that really weird. Um Right. So irreverence is a big issue, yeah, because it shows a lack of appreciation for who is God or who God is. God in the Eucharist is fully contained, meaning someone who could annihilate creation is present to you. Right. I mean, like, yeah, if you want to take that angle, but like, yes, like who created everything is present to you, um, or presented to you. And so, like, it's one of the reasons why we don't have 75% mass attendance like we did 100 years ago. Like it's this, well, you come up in the like here's the thing, in our culture it is very evident that if you go up to receive the Eucharist like you would receive like a handout, like say I don't know, at the food court, if you've ever been to a food court, because we're at that point where like you may not have because malls are not that popular anymore, but like where you receive in such a way where it's not necessarily unique, right? Like the uniqueness of it adds a dimension. Like I don't receive, the only time I receive food in my mouth from another person is when my wife feeds me cake on my birthday or something. Like it's just something, or like we're sharing a special moment, right? Like that's like a very intimate thing to do. But it makes a lot of sense that God would do that, right? Like that's how God would, you know, be intimate with you. And it's not like you're just eating a piece of bread, a cookie, a wafer, any, you know, just anything. You're eating, you're consuming God. And like that's special. When you remove the specialness of that, and that can happen in a variety of ways, like you can technically, so like reverence has a few definitions. Like you have reverence where you're following the protocols and you're doing what the church is asking. So that's a type of reverence, right? But then there's like also practical reverence where there are certain actions that reflect a disposition, because that's what actions do. They reflect a disposition internally. So when I kneel, I am saying I submit to what someone's doing, right? Like I'm giving an incredibly, like you can take this from a very like alpha perspective, right? Like you can take this from like a you know, a Chad perspective. whatever, like where it's like, you're better than me, I'm kneeling. Like you're like in the most like alpha beta situation, you're better than me, I am kneeling before you because you are superior. Like that is a pretty like like I know not everybody kneels during mass like that, but the action itself is understood universally, that when you kneel before someone, like that has significance. And so like um excuse me. Um another video topic. I just sorry. Um yeah, that's the other thing. Alternatively, the floor isn't actually that painful there, and I say that as someone with a massive knee surgery. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I will sometimes just. That's the other thing. Some people won't kneel because they're like, there's no kneelers. Like, why would I kneel? And it's like, okay, well, why wouldn't you kneel? Like that's the other question. Because like you're supposed to kneel, and you're absolutely right. Like a lot of places in Europe, a lot of places just they don't have kneelers. So you just kneel on the ground. Um, let's see. Oh, gotcha. The reason I use annihilation is because we are advised not to fear anyone except he who can cast us into hell. Christ is in the Eucharist can cast us into hell. Yep. He doesn't want to, but he will. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Someone feeding you is an act of caregiving. So like that kind of also goes into our trust with priests. So obviously the abuse scandal is very clearly something that is influencing our trusting of priests. But like the fact that they don't give us the Eucharist, give us God by hand in the mouth is also like another step, because that's a very intimate thing. Like it's not like I just let anybody like I mean, I don't let anybody. I don't go to a extraordinary minister at all. I will go to the priest if I'm at another parish. We don't have extraordinary ministers at our parish. We haven't for I think a few years now. So that's been great. But it's like it's very intimate. Like I trust my priest, like, and I look at him like a father because that's what he is. There's all these like here's the thing. There's all these little things that build up a relationship. And if you only care about the big things, like you're gonna you're gonna lose that relationship, or at least you're gonna keep it at a superficial level, but you're not gonna necessarily have it in a way that you're expected to. And that's very dangerous because like you're expected to submit to the priest. You're expected to like go to him for counsel. You're expected to when you have an issue of like say you're spiritually lukewarm, you shouldn't be going to Reddit, right? Like you shouldn't be going to Reddit as your first go-to for you having an issue with how you are. You should be going to your priest, you should be talking to him. You should be doing a lot of things in that relationship that people just don't normally do. But instead, because we have this understanding of culturally of a religious CEO is what the priest is, and we don't have an like we receive communion in a, like I said, in a way that you would receive um, uh, in a piece of food in almost every other way of like life. Like when I give a cookie to my kids, you want to know how they like ask for it? They put their hands up, right? Like they put their hands up to receive the cookie. Um, like there's a reason why that connection happens there is because it's very normal. Now, did I just happen to give an accidental example of a fatherly thing to do with your kids? Yes, I did. In reception on the hand. Yes, I did. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't just do that. But then I would appeal to the particles problem. So just to let you know. So I'm very aware of like sometimes I say things that well, I guess it's not sometimes I say things. It's like the way like given the way I've grown up and like what I'm experiencing and comparing to, like I can see both sides, but there is an issue of like at the end of the day, like the church clearly teaches certain things, and the people who want to promote certain things seem to be ignoring that. And like it's as simple as that. Like I don't know how else to like say that. Some people may think that's mean. I don't care. Like the church says something, like you should do it. Um when it comes to things that she, tells us to do, because she is the spiritual mother of us. And like I've said in a lot of videos, like our understanding of our relationship with the priest, the church herself, everybody is really in whack. Like it's not good. And like I know people are focusing on Jesus, and that's good. However, it's really weird to somehow focus on Jesus but then really fail at the relationship with the church. Like that's a very weird thing to observe. But I've, on more than one occasion, I've had to discuss it with friends. I'm not going to go into like specific examples here because I really, this video is already like 10 minutes too long. So, yeah. Right. So remember the man who was struck dead for trying to stop the Ark of the Covenant from falling over. God literally killed him for touching the Ark. How much more serious should handling God himself be? Yeah, exactly. But would you? That's a question. Would you kneel on Legos? So I completely agree. Yeah. So I think we've come to a point with the internet. So I'm just going to address something that I think Mark said, but I don't want to put it up on the thing on the screen because I was trying to avoid addressing this directly. But this understanding from the hierarchy that certain things are happening and that they're making scientific claims, or they'll make claims that clearly need evidence. And then they won't provide the evidence. They'll just move forward with it. That's really hard to do with the internet. Like that's really hard to prove with the internet now. Like when you say, for example, like people receiving on the tongue are causing division in the church and yada, 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 like you better show the receipts for that, because that is not a thing to lightly say. And when you and it's not a matter of like, I literally just pointed to the catechism as to why that they better do that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't want to act like I'm acting too casual with them. So, because like I do respect the office of the bishop, and it's not a matter of, I know better than the bishop. It's just, it's kind of like, let's put it another way. Some of the excuses that are given for some of the reasons that they do. I'm not going to tell you who specifically or what, because that is not my place. I should not be correcting a bishop. Bishops should be correcting bishops. That's their job, not mine. Right? Like that's I'm just a layman. But it's kind of like dad going out like and getting a drink and then saying like, like, not that he's drunk. It's just like he's doing something he's not supposed to, and he's trying to pull one over on the kids. But the kids like, hey, I didn't go out and get candy. I didn't go out and get candy and eat it. But it's like the kids can clearly see the wrapper in his pockets, right? Like, so it's like there's a problem there when the evidence is stacked against what the bishops are saying. And now we go back to, like, for example, some of the Protestant criticisms of the hierarchy, because like they're right to criticize that, right? Like they're right to criticize people who have a problem coming into the Catholic faith because they see hypocrisy, are right in pointing out that hypocrisy, just as we are right in pointing that hypocrisy out ourselves, because it's scandalous. That being said, again, it's not my place to take the role of a bishop. I am not a bishop, so I will not use a specific example because of that. But yeah. So that's kind of it. Hopefully, I didn't. I don't think I crossed any lines. But that's it. That's all I got. I promote. I'm definitely one who promotes kneeling and receiving on the tongue. I'm not saying I'm not going to go against the church and say you can't do reception standing and in the hand, because the church has allowed it, and so I'm not going to pretend that that's my preference. Is the one that's the rule, right? So and I think a lot of us, not anybody in the chat or anything, because that hasn't been shown at all. The chat's been awesome, but there's definitely people out there that definitely make the argument that no, we should only be receiving on the tongue. You can kind of make the argument. I think the only way you can make that argument, if you're going to make that, is you have to appeal to the problem of the particles falling, like I showed in the video. Because just as the indult pointed out that I pointed to earlier, John the 6th, like the particles can't be being dropped. Like they can't just be dropped. And like when that starts happening more and more, which we're kind of at a point where, like, I mean, do people, like, you can on the regular videotape or see people in live streams taking the host back to their seat and then consuming it there or putting it in their pocket. Like, you can find it. Like, they're on Twitter. It's on Twitter all over the place. So it's like, it's not like what we're talking about is like some abstract maybe that's kind of happening, maybe not. It's definitely something where it's an issue. And like, if you had to go to the extreme, right? Like, you bring up black masses require a stolen Eucharist. Like, they require it. And it's really easy to steal a Eucharist from an extraordinary minister who's not paying attention, which unfortunately seems to be the case in a lot of cases, because there's so many people who are walking away from extraordinary ministers with the host when they're supposed to be taught to do it. Like, you have to receive in front of you. I wouldn't say it's a majority, but it's enough that it's noticeable, right? Like, I'm not going to put all extraordinary ministers under the bus. Like, that's not fair. But it definitely happens. Let's see. See, I disagree because of a Protestant is being led away from the church due to a scandal from the hierarchy. That's grave scandal, since it will damn them. We have an obligation to speak out then. Absolutely. So absolutely. But I guess what I'm getting at is, I'm not going to, so it should totally be called out. It should not be like, for example, this is actually an example of that, right? This video is an example of that. A scandal recently happened where someone was saying to do something in a way that is not what the church has stated, or at least the church has allowed, right? Like, there's omissions of facts that were not present in the statements. And so what I did is I made a video where I'm literally providing those statements. I'm providing the reasoning from cited documents, and I'm showing like what we should and should not be doing based off those. And so I'm not calling out the specific prelate. I am trying to be as vague as possible. but it's because it's I firmly believe that is not my choice. Like that's not up for me to do. I know better, in the sense that I know it's a scandal. I know it can be a problem for other Catholics. And so I'm trying to reinforce the other Catholics, right? Like, so without drawing attention unnecessarily to myself in regards to the prelate. Okay. So like that's my line. Okay. Because I do believe none of this gets better in the hierarchy if the hierarchy doesn't correct itself. Like none of it gets better from the hierarchy unless the bishops are willing to say, "Hey, I'm going to admonish you because what you're doing is wrong, and I'm doing so out of love, and like showing brotherly love to each other, in a public way because it causes scandal. Like if like you have the Archbishop of New York, for example, he didn't make the statement, but says something. We live in a time where that's going to affect Sacramento, right? We live in a time where it's going to affect Hayes's diocese potentially in Australia. Like it is crazy the reach that prelates have now that go beyond their borders. And even priests, like you hear some priests saying like really like stupid things, really stupid things that undermine maybe what a parish is like. Say a parish is in particular is working on, you know, getting the congregation to kneel during the Eucharistic prayer, and then you have a priest coming out and saying, "Oh, it's completely fine to stand during the Eucharistic prayer in America on Twitter, like in Twitter." If someone from that congregation reads that priest, that person from that congregation is now has the potential to doubt his spiritual father because of what the other spiritual father is doing. And so now you have this like the lack of clarity is crazy. Like it's just crazy. It's not good. And there are too many celebrity priests. I do think celebrity priests by themselves are not inherently wrong. I think there's a good aspect to that, but there are definitely too many in respect to those that will be laissez-faire with a certain tenant because their personal experience doesn't allow them to whatever. Like you can't do that. Your personal experience doesn't trump what the church is saying on a global scale. There are ramifications for promoting that, like, and it's a problem. So, for the record, I think you're doing a good job. Ultimately, we need to be praying and fasting for them to get the grace to change. Yeah, like no, I get what you're saying though. So like, I get what you're saying. So like, I don't want to give you the impression that I'm offended or not. Like, I'm not offended that you brought that up, and that's fine if you disagree. It's just like my point is like my main point is like bishops should be correcting each other, not me. And like I think we're smart enough, like to know that what's going on right now. This specific thing, whether or not like somebody watching this 3 years from now has another situation from another prelate, it seems to happen every like decade or something. But it's don't I'm not offended or anything, and thank you. So so let's see, is there anything else? Right. And ultimately their jobs are to help save souls. They will be held accountable. So I did this out of order, so just for people who are reading, and it would be better for them if they do so charity. Yes. But I also, okay, so to that end, I think the bishops having time to correct each other is also a thing. Like, give them time to say something, because I know they have to be somewhat political in when they respond. And when you think of certain prelates, some prelates have a certain sway and power that others don't. And so there's unfortunately a dynamic right now that makes it hard for certain bishops to come out and say something. It's kind of like when you see, like, because I've seen this on Twitter a bunch of times, like you have Father James Martin who will outward like correct a bishop in a tweet. It's like, whoa, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, that's not you. Like, that's not, like, it's just horrendous. Like, it's just horrendous. Like, there is no reason a priest should be correcting a bishop when the bishop is literally citing from Vatican resources, like, what he's doing and how he's justified in doing it. It's crazy to me. Like, I would not be surprised in the next 10 years that there comes a reining in of the priests and bishops and potentially the laity when it comes to what happens on the internet. Because again, there's a lot of undermining that happens. And I do think there's a particular unappreciation. I don't even know. Is that the appropriate word? There's not an appreciation for what happens across boundaries anymore. Like, there's not, like, when one priest says one thing over here and it undermines what the work of, another priest is doing, that is completely, like, legitimate. Like, and, another example is like the orange posture. You have one priest saying, oh, well, like, the priest should be the only one doing the orange posture, which is my opinion. And then the other priest is going, online is saying, like, that's not something to worry about. Like, don't worry about it. Focus on Jesus. And then it's like, okay, well, but like the obedience aspect there, like, you're now like creating a disruption with the obedience aspect, and obedience to the church and obedience to your spiritual father, which is in line with being and loving with loving Christ. So it's like you're using the very reason, like, why someone cares against them, like, as if, like, oh yeah, like, don't like, it's just, you're using the very reason why they care against them, as if, like, it's almost like gaslighting. Like, that's what it ends up coming out as. Let's see. All right, so I reverted to the faith. So this will be the last line. So I'll try to get done in the next 5 minutes, but I think this is important. Thanks for being here, Lemur. I'm sorry, I'm probably screwing that up. I reverted to the faith in February. My local parish doesn't even have a communion rail or even a crucifix. I noticed basically everyone took communion by the hand, but I would kneel. Kneeling on the tongue for the past few months, I've noticed others copying me. Good thing. That happened to me too when we changed parishes. Like, I started kneeling and receiving communion, and I was the only one at my the time, because the mass at that time that was receiving, there was another old woman that was also receiving at the same time on the Saturday mass, but for the morning mass, that's what would happen. So, like, you'll look weird at first doing it as the only one, and I remember feeling like I was getting weird looks, but now we got more doing it. Well, I mean, you were probably more than feeling like you got weird looks. You probably were getting weird looks. And that's okay, because, like, that's exactly, I mean, like, I was there too. So, like, I totally get where you're at. Just keep doing it. And, you may want to ask the priest, and this will help. And I've said this in another video, if you want to ever, like, inch towards traditional, like, moving the parish to a traditional appreciation, ask the priest if he can put a kneeler there. If he puts a kneeler there, you're going to see more people kneel. Like, you will see more people kneel. They may still receive on the hand, but you'll see more people kneel. So glad to have you back. Let's see. Though reasonably, they potentially could insist you receive on the tongue to protect the Eucharist, such as an obvious tremor or theft of host in the area. Exactly. Like, like the Archdiocese of Detroit for a long time held host to a giant pagan convention at one of the hotels. And I don't know if a Black Mass ever happened there. I don't think it did. However, the fact that it was significant um, and potentially a problem probably should have been like noticed or having attention, because because I don't know, like I know about it because if you don't know, my wife used to be a practicing pagan. Um, she is now a Catholic, but like the I like you just don't know who's there, but you know that there's just a giant pagan convention going on. Like, and that's like it's not like a fake pagan convention; it's an actual pagan convention. So, yeah. Um, okay, but let's also note that obedience is not never questioning or correcting anyone. Correct. This was actually something that was corrected by the preconciliar papacy, but fell off due to modernists. Yeah, I think because so it's kind of like the same thing with like certain laws during the jab pandemic area. Um, because and the reason why I'm saying that is because I don't really want to get picked up by YouTube, but the where certain laws all of a sudden disappeared for being against certain medical procedures and having your right to do that. And the dominating force was the force and power that wanted you just to assimilate. And so, and bend the knee to it. And so that's, I mean, like, human nature is human nature, and we'll see it sometimes in the church, even if we see it in the secular realm. And if it happens in the secular realm, it is probably happening in the church, not because the human element of the church, is so terrible. It's just it's because the cultures are not separated, right? Like religion and politics are very intermingled, and they're so intermingled that we will sometimes use the same language, even though not terribly, even though it may not be terribly appropriate. Um, like if I say like a conservative Catholic, in most people's minds, they're probably thinking of an Orthodox Catholic, and in at least people who watch my videos. And if you're saying like a liberal Catholic, you're probably thinking of a heterodox Catholic. Um, so I mean, like that's or a heretic Catholic. In I guess like I guess it's not technically a heretic because you can't just call someone a heretic. But what I'm doing is I'm giving an explanation, and that may not necessarily be the case. And so like there is nuance, and I think the nuance matters. So that's what I'm saying, and that's why I think even though they're relatable, like the translation is not always accurate. Okay, so everyone's yeah, you're carrying a toddler. Yeah, that's I mean that happens. Um like we at ours, yeah, like you're that's completely reasonable. Let's see. Olive. Oh, well, whatever. Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to. No one copies it. Okay. Well, yeah. I'm sorry about that, Olive. Um. So, who wanted to push the version of unquestionably doing things as the obedience that was Catholic, regardless of it was objectively good or not? Not even the Pope has the authority to command sin. Right. Like, and that's so. Yeah, I think. Correct. Let's see. I'm usually let's. Okay. Um. Yes. Okay. So I think we're good. So also there's this. I think this will help you with your if you're ever trying to evangelize, right? Like your point, your position is not to beat someone over the head with information. Your position is to inform, not convince. And so when I say beat people over the head with information, I mean like you're clearly trying to convince them through different ways of saying it in a way that goes above and beyond reason. Like it's not your place to convince someone. Like God is going to help you with that. Like planting a seed is good. Like even if you don't see here, I think it's a Chinese proverb. Or it's a paraphrase of a Chinese proverb. Planting the seed is good even if you never enjoy the shade of that tree. So what's important is that the tree gets planted. So that's the important thing. Okay, yeah. So I mean, yeah, you got to pray. Yeah, I mean, too often, what we don't do is we'll just say like, oh well, we're thoughts and prayers and like or I'm praying for that person, or you may even go so far as to fast, and that's really good. Like fasting is that next step, because what you're doing is you're doing more than just like praying is good, but fasting takes that, like, how do you say it? It's like extra praying. Like I guess like I guess like that's like it's um I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not a theologian, so my words are not going to be like extremely nuanced, but it's like I'll say super praying or something, because like you're clearly doing something that's an action, and you're clearly taking sacrifices yourself. Like, because a lot of people will be like, all right, well, I'll pray for this person, and they'll pray for like literally 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 or 30 seconds. Okay, that's a good thing. I totally get that. But comparing that to someone who fasts, the person who's fasting is clearly making it personal in a way that I think most of us should probably appreciate. Um, so I don't want to give the impression that the one who's praying is like bad, like, because it's a combination of good and more good. It's not a combination. It's not a good and bad scenario, right? Like that's not the comparison. And so but yeah, like too often like we do just say we pray, but we don't do the necessary sacrifices on top of it. And so like that's also another thing. So to keep in mind. So I'll go even further and say maybe sacrifice in some appropriate manner. Yeah, that one. That's the one. Um, kneeling. So hello, traditional question mark. Uh, Kneeling is not mandatory in the Catholic Church for reception of communion. It is required at certain parts of the Mass. So you do have to kneel at certain times if you are able. Whenever you enter so for example, I'll give you an example of something that you have to kneel. It's also called genuflecting. So don't do it in a movie theater, although you may feel inclined to because of how the movie theater is shaped. But as you're about to enter the pew, you bend on your right knee, and then you do the sign of the cross towards where the tabernacle is. Usually it's behind the altar. Sometimes it's off to the side. It depends. But there is that's an example of when you're in the space for Mass, like that you're expected to kneel. Yes. So yes, but I also want to make sure so it is extra reverence for the host, but it's like it's definitely an internal disposition. Um like I don't do it to show off. I don't do it to get attention. I do it because of my relationship with God, and that that is the greatest way, aside from, I can't receive while being prostrate, right? Like, can't do that. Not to say I'm inclined to. It's just I'm using an example. Like, kneeling is the like in a pretty objectively submissive way of showing reference um, to God, and what you're being given. So, not that you're doing it to show off. So thanks for being here. Um, uh, so the indult is based off the conference of the bishops. So it's country. Yeah, it's country. Oh man, I learned it on Church Militant. Yeah, they're like 10 minutes down the road for me. I mean, they disbanded, but not to say I want to be like them. I don't. Uh, they actually are a huge inspiration as to why I'm not as gun ho as I like. If you talk to me in person, you're gonna notice a little bit more bluntness. I'm a little bit reserved on here only because I want to make sure that I'm not saying things that go above what I should be saying. Um, yeah. Let's see. No, like genuflecting. So yeah, genuflecting. I'm sorry, I only mentioned half of the genuflecting traditional. The other part that you have to genuflect for is when you cross the altar. You have to genuflect when you cross the altar. So like if you're going from the right side of the church to the left side, not only do you have to kneel as you're going in and out of the pew, you have to kneel as you're crossing the center of the altar. So you get to do that 3 times. So, no, I am like super blunt. Like, I am one of those guys where like my words, I'm very blunt. Part of that has to do with my limited vocabulary. The other part is like you have citations and you're just like, you don't want to mince words, and so you just get right to the point. Because if you mince words, like euphemisms come out and people will start like abusing the abstracts, and it's like, well, no, but like the abstract's clearly defined here. What are you doing? Why are you going over there? Like, stay over here. Like, the church says to stay over here. Like, so that's my attitude about why I'm blunt. I also think that the idea that it's a dude thing to be blunt, like, you don't want to, like, it's a motherly thing to do to sugarcoat things. Like, to nurture and to not have that edge, right? Like, so my wife's not, she doesn't like to sugarcoat. So like, it's funny that I'm saying that, but the fact that like there are certain guys are typically blunt with each other if they notice, like, when you're in a fraternity or you have friends, like guy friends, like they're typically blunt to you, like, hey, why are you looking like a thing the Pope said earlier this year? Like, it'll come off as a joke, but it'll also be kind of like a question, and you kind of have to answer it. And so it's but that's not what I mean by my bluntness. Like, the example I just gave was actually terrible. But it's yeah, I'm just gonna stop talking on that. So I'm I can't come back from that. Yeah, I'm at the other one in the morning. I'm just not gonna say it on the air. So that's I'm not gonna do that. So I'm just at the other one. You really should just become Catholic. I'm just gonna say that right now. You really should just become Catholic, because the classical Reformed, what they were just doing was trying to be Catholic in their own way. And so I will fight you on this, and I'll I I'll send you to Catholic Answers or something. No, seriously, that's where I would suggest to go. So, if you're seriously looking at it, um, go to Catholic Answers. And one instance in particular that I think would be very interesting is when you look at, because I don't know why you're not Catholic, so I'm just going to give you an instance that I think resonates with a lot of people. Is the instance of Pope Saint Stephen the First in the 200s declaring that heretics can in fact validly baptize. That whole scenario points to the church, points to only one church, because they're talking about heretics, and then also points to the Pope, because the Pope is required in that whole instance. He actually has to give the clarification. That's part of the job of the Pope, is to clarify the teachings of the church. And so look up Pope Saint Stephen, valid baptisms of heretics. And that's Catholic Answers does a great job explaining the history. And I think that would be interesting for anybody to look at who's not Catholic. I mean, I even reference that to Orthodox because it undermines their points too, because at that point you didn't have the what is it, the Pentecost Council, the I can't remember what the name is, but basically where the 5 patriarchs are in charge for the 5 C's. And like this happened before them, and they just simply didn't, the C's didn't exist. And so obviously we're not Orthodox, so like that's another thing, but I don't want to go into a theology lesson, and I'm like 45 minutes past what I wanted this to be. This is like way too long. So let's see. No, that's fine. That's fine. Mark, I see your comment. No, I'm serious though. Like when it comes to that Saint Stephen, Pope Saint Stephen in the 200s, valid baptisms of heretics. It answers a lot of questions that, like, including like, there's just a lot of questions that are answered in that scenario. So that's why I bring it up. So if you're inclined to look at it. So, okay, I think I'm going to get going. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody who's been here. And like, because like I am way past this. I wanted this to be a half hour, and you guys helped make it 45 minutes. But I appreciate you guys going back and forth and talking. I wish there was an easy way to like get people from chat to like have their own like icon and talk through a mic. I mean, that would be really cool. Kind of like a mix between Spaces in Twitter and in videos. Like that would be a cool idea. I mean, obviously you don't want to invite the wrong person, because then you got to like shut them off. But I'm just saying, like, it would be really cool to have that out. And thank you everybody. Traditional Olive, Hayes, Mark, Starskim, and everybody else who's watching. If you haven't liked it already, please like it. I would appreciate it. But yeah, Hayes, exactly. Yep, that would be really cool. And hopefully, like, if you're doing it on YouTube, it doesn't matter if you're in Australia. Like, that would be great. Because like over there, it's already tomorrow. And so it's like really weird, because it's the 16th over here, but it's the 17th over there. Like it's kind of weird. But I know it, whatever. So, all right. So thanks everybody. Oh, yeah, Mark, bonjour. All right. So every time, yeah, she's probably not happy. Okay, so yeah, it's lunchtime. Oh man. Yeah, that's I thought it was like 10 year time. So okay, all right, I'm gonna get going. Thank you all for joining me, and please share this with anybody because, like, again, the very beginning of it is, I mean, it's really like I try to stick by the book, by the letter of the law and what it says and showing it. Um, I really do think that's helpful, and I really did try to keep my personality out of it in the sense of giving you a bunch of like anecdotes in between. I left that for the end, which is why it took like we're still going. So, um, but yeah, all right. So thank you guys. I appreciate you guys uh, coming here, and I'll talk to you on Friday.